So, good afternoon. It's February the 7th, it's 3 o'clock, and you're Joe and Mike's award-winning virtual tours. And we're back in Newhaven. We only covered half of the village, but we thought it was such a lovely place, we thought we'd continue and give you the second half of it. But we'll start off where we nearly finished the last time, and we're at the little community garden here. One thing that Newhaven has, they've got a little fund called the Newhaven is for the Fund for the Common Good. And the money that's raised go to develop little projects. And one of the projects here is a wee community garden that anybody's invited to, but also has a bit of history right behind it. Maybe Mike can focus up on the back of the wall. We did show you this Armada stone before, but we didn't show you the original. Up here on the wall we have the original Armada stone. The Armada stone has got the date on it, 1588, and it commemorates the defeat, the defeat of the Spanish Armada by Drake and Elizabeth I, the English Navy, but the Armada took refuge up here and in the Forth, and so this is really here to commemorate the Armada. And you can see there's two globes at the bottom. It's got I'll read it out for you. It says, "In the name of God," but they've actually spelled name wrong. They've got N-E-A-M, in the name of God. So I don't know whether that was deliberate or not, but it's certainly a little quirky thing on. Of course, you've got the ship there as well. So that's the Armada stone right underneath the gardens. And again, when you come to Edinburgh, come for a little walk around this historic little village area. It is absolutely gorgeous. The village itself gives its existence to the development of the Scottish Navy under James IV. James IV wanted to build a huge navy for Scotland, and the big ship that was built here was called the Great Michael. We mentioned the Great Michael last week, and it said that they used all of the forests in Fife to build it. It was a huge ship, certainly the biggest in the Scottish Navy, and it said you could fit the three ships that Christopher Columbus had into the hull of the Great Michael. So large was it. And here's the wee community garden here. It's actually been they're planting right now, so they're actually actively working on it. Lovely wee place, open to the community, and it's open to everyone to enjoy. And the locals here can get involved in the development of it as well. So we've got our primroses coming up. You can see the bulbs are coming up. It's the same in my garden. I've got all my bulbs are coming up. There's green shoots, as they used to say. They're coming up, and they are actively working on at the moment. So we're going to take you through from the old part of the village across to the new part and give you some views. It's still an active fishing port. Not port as such, but they still sell fish here. But they don't bring the fish in. But there are some lobster fishermen here as well. You can see their creels. So they still have a good connection with the fishing industry. So let's have a wee walk around. It's a wee bit. We learned last week that it's a wee bit colder down by the river than it is where we live in Edinburgh. I live south of Edinburgh, and we were down here last week, and it was brutally cold, but it's not too bad today. So we're going to take you into the old Fish Market Square, just to give you an idea of where the water used to come up to here. So the boats would actually come up here. Now, we're going to show you some pictures in a minute of the traditional wear that the fishwives used to wear here. Because the fishwives, the Newhaven fishwives were famous. They used to take the catch, it could be oysters or herring or any other fish, and they would be carrying on their back these huge baskets. They weigh about 50 kilograms. 50 kilograms is about 8 stone. 8 stone in pounds. Well, what's 8 times 14? 8 ones are 8. 8 fours are 32. 102. Just over 100 pounds as well. And these women would be carrying on their back, and some of them would be walking into the city of Edinburgh, and it's about 4 or 5 miles just south of here. And I've got a wee picture I want to show you. The costumes that they would wear here. I mean, Mike can pick that up there. They're very colourful. They were well known in Edinburgh. The last fishwives in Edinburgh operated up until the 1970s. Now, they could travel further. They could take trains and go up to Stirling and over to Fife to sell their wares, but they travelled a lot to sell their products. And they were well known. Here's a more traditional picture of them. Now, if you look at the costumes, in my mind, they look rather Flemish or Low Country. And that goes back to the 1500s, because when they were building the Great Michael, the ship of the Great Michael, I'll just hold it here so that maybe better with the wind. When they were building the Great Michael, James IV brought a lot of artisans and shipwrights and shipbuilders over from France and from the Low Countries, and they formed quite a closed society. And in fact, it was said that the fishermen and women off the Newhaven would have their certain traditions, and one of the traditions was they would actually marry within their own society. So almost like travelling people to a certain extent. They married within themselves, and the women, when they got married, which was quite progressive, never took, or very rarely took, their husband's name. They kept their own names, which I thought was quite progressive for the women at the time. Here we've got a famous little pub here. This place used to be all pubs. All along the front here would be pubs. There's only one or two surviving at the moment. This is the Harbour Inn, formerly known as the Stone Pier Inn. Great little place, nice and cosy inside, and also they serve food, so you're never short of places to eat when you come down to Newhaven. And Mike will probably point out here, you can see the lighthouse. And we're going to go finish at the lighthouse when we get onto the market itself. And here you got a little explanation. The Newhaven, a village on the Firth of Forth, a couple of miles north of Edinburgh, an ancient naval and fishing tradition, and it was known as the Novus Portus de Leith. So the Newhaven, the new door, the Newhaven, and James IV launched his mighty Great Michael in 1511. Very close-knit community here. Obviously now in the 21st century there's been a few changes that have taken place, but we can still get a flavour of the old village here. We're going to take you across to the harbour itself and give you some views of the harbour. It's easily accessible when you come down here, and if you're on your own travelling, you can catch a coach, you can catch a bus. Plenty of bus services, and also at the moment they're developing the tram system, extending the tram system here in Edinburgh, and the trams will terminate down here. So this is going to really, again, add some more radical change to the village itself. The population started off with a population of about 800 families. They had, there were artisans, there were skills. Now the town, or the village itself, or the suburb of Edinburgh, of Newhaven, I would say it's around about 5,000, but they're building on all of the reclaimed land. So it's all old land owned by the Fourth Ports community or company, and they're developing it into, it's almost like a little Manhattan appearing all over the this area. Now have a look at the front here. So all along here you would see lots of different pubs, and the pubs down here in Leith always had different licensing laws from the ones in Edinburgh, and it said it was for the fishing community to keep them, because you didn't know when the boats were coming in. So you could actually, people in Edinburgh used to come down to Leith because the drinking laws are quite different. And there was one pub, and it was quite close to where I used to live, and it was actually at the boundary between Leith and Edinburgh, and the pub itself had a line going across the floor. And so when the pubs closed in Edinburgh at 10 o'clock at night, they used to close. So when the pubs in Edinburgh closed at 10 o'clock, people would just cross to the other side of the bar, and then the other pubs would be opened up, and you get served, because the licensing laws in Leith were completely different from the ones in Edinburgh. And that tradition went on for quite a while. Now let's walk over here, and we'll get a good view of the new buildings here. We've got the markets, fish market, which we'll have a wee look at. But we've also got a nice little parade of lovely restaurants. Great place to come to throughout the year. We've got Lochfine restaurant. Lochfine is one of my favourite restaurants. Lochfine, the original one, the restaurant is actually on Lochfine itself. I think there's a chain, they're all around Great Britain at the moment. But the original one is on the road to Inverary. And you can go in there, and the seafood platters, the lobsters, the whole thing, I mean, it's delicious. You get about £50, you have a massive seafood platter, which you can share. But when I get it, I like to eat it all myself. And the good thing about these restaurants here is that they're all fish restaurants. So we've got the pier brasserie as well. Right next door to it, we've got the fishmonger. And the fishmonger is right next to the fish market. So if you're looking for fresh fish, this is the place to come. And we've got one of the fishmongers in Edinburgh that's very well known as the Welsh fishmonger. They were established in the 1950s. And they used to have shops all around Edinburgh, but they consolidated down here. Parking is much better down here if you want to go for your fish. And also if you want to come down to restaurants, you don't get charged for parking because they've got good parking. Whereas in town, parking can be quite expensive, especially for us locals. So you can come down here, get your fish fresh. We used to have a saying that you never bought your fish on a Monday because the fleet didn't go out on a Sunday. And also, I think I mentioned before I grew up Catholic, and we used to have a fish van that used to come around our streets. And you always knew where the Catholic houses were because the fish van always stopped outside the Catholic houses because Catholics were not allowed to eat meat on a Friday. And of course, this is when the fish van would come round. So it was just one of these old little traditions that I remember, certainly. And Mike, I think, Mike, you remember the... you got a member of the fishwives coming around with the baskets on them on the back.
I believe they travelled about 30 miles away from here, and it was quite a female community where they all kept their own names as well. I just want to mention the type of fish that they would be bringing. They would be bringing herring. They were well known for that, but also cod and haddock, and of course. Before that, the oysters, but they fished out the oyster beds, didn't they, Joe?
Well, the oyster beds kind of got destroyed in this middle of the 1700s. It was further upriver. They were it was part of the agricultural improvement, and they were draining off some of the swamps further up and using it, and sort of changed the silting of the river here. So from the riverbed here, oysters. You couldn't grow them, to be honest. And then remember, in the 1950s and 60s, they built the big petrochemical plant. So, would you want to eat anything out of there? I wouldn't eat anything. I would take mine from the West Coast. I'm sorry. I'm quite snobbish about where my shellfish comes from. Either further up north, but not from the river here. That's my little quirky thing. But normally, when you see it on the menus, they will tell you where the food comes from. They'll tell you where the scallops were dyed for. They'll tell you where the oysters come from. All the provenance of all the food that you get on your restaurants is always named, because I always take great pride in which port it comes from, which coast it comes from. And Scotland is famous for its such clean coastal line, you know. So we're very famous for our exporting of fish and seafood throughout the whole of Europe. In fact, I was in Spain a couple of years ago. I go there quite regularly, and I love eating the razor shells, and they always sell them as razor shells, and they always say escocés because they're really proud of it's very Scottish, you know, and it's a big selling point for the Spanish restaurants as well. Let's take a wee further along. Yep. And the women also did all the line baiting here. They did all of the gutting. They did all that. So the men would be out, maybe under trawlers and fishing or bringing it in, but the women did the lion's share of the work, without a doubt.
The women would separate out the catch to the fishwives to take away in their baskets to sell, and it was all to be very evenly distributed. So some of the better fish and some of the medium type fish and small fish, they would all make sure they were equally separated as much as they were.
Yeah, and that goes back to the strong community that they had. It wasn't competitive. They weren't they're all supporting each other. Yeah. That's what kind of links on to the common good fund that they have here down in Newhaven. We've got a wee bit of a storm coming in here, not too much, but there's some people having their fish and chips, fresh fish and chips from the show.
You might want to say something about Darwin, maybe.
Well, I was going to mention some of the people who are connected with it in general. Yeah. Of course, we've got, Charles Darwin used to skip his classes at university and come down here to just further along the shore here because they can get he was come down here looking for fossils. So he was one of the famous people that come down here. Maybe some of the British viewers will remember Hannah Gordon. Well, she's still alive, I believe. But Hannah Gordon was born here as well. And we also have Dr. Johnson come down here as well. So Dr. Johnson came down here, and there's a little poem he gets mentioned in the fisherman's poem, where Dr. Johnson would come down here, maybe spend an hour or two down here, and it was said he's preoccupied, but he would have come down here for his oysters. And they used to have this tradition here when the wealthy were actually having their oysters outside in the restaurants. The local girls, fishing girls, would come and they would sing for their money, and the people who were having, their lunch, etc., would throw the girls money. So the girls literally had to sing for their supper. Look at the collection of wee dogs here. Look at the gorgeous. Hey, buddies. Look at this. Are they all Labradors?
No, she's a Labradoodle and she's a Lab Pointed Cross.
Girl! Oh, here we are. We're getting mobbed now.
Yeah, she's not really fierce.
No, they're on.
He's pure Labrador, he's pure Labrador.
All right, so mixtures: Labradoodles, Labradors.
Labradoodle, Lab Pointer and 2 Labradors.
Excellent. Lovely dogs. So we've got the fish market here. So this whole red building here, this is the actual Newhaven fish market itself. So they still actively have a fish market, but the fish is brought in from usually from up north, from Peterhead. But the fish will come down here, and the fishmongers will come in here, and they will buy and sell the fish for their fish shops all through Edinburgh. Now, Mike and I come down to here quite often because in the summertime, this is where some of the cruise liners will come here and berth. We're pleased to say that from all the reports that we're getting from the agencies that the ships are coming in again for this year. I believe that the military tattoo is back on this year, and when the military tattoo is on in the month of August, there is about 8 to 10 huge cruise liners all lined up in the Firth of Forth. Some of them are actually pulled into the different ports, because there's 3 or 4 different ports, maybe 4 or 5 different ports here. Some of them actually pull into the port. But the ones that pull in here, they anchor out on the river, and they come in on little tenders. And we meet them all here, come into the tenders, and Mike will be here playing his bagpipes for them, and we'll welcome them here. And then we'll take them into, we'll take the coaches, and we'll take them up to the city. If the tattoo's not on, we'll just do the tours of the city and give people some free time to go up and do some shopping. But it's during the month of August when the tattoo is on. It's like a bus station out there on the river. Now, I don't know if Mike can go across here now. You're going to get a good view of the village itself, of the front. We always talk about repurposing buildings, and you'll see the lovely church here, which is built in the 19th century. This used to be St Andrew's Church. Now, St Andrew's Church was established by one of the ministers who was involved in the Great Disruption. I think we mentioned that last week. It's when the Church of Scotland split. And they split for political reasons, because part of the church wanted to, or the gentry, shall we say, wanted to nominate or have a big say in the nomination of the ministers, and that's never been part of the Presbyterian philosophy. The Presbyterian philosophy is everybody was equal, everybody had the same view, a same vote, and so there was a split in the church in the 1800s, and this is one of the churches that was established by the Free Church, as they were known. As with everything else, the church congregation dropped, and rather than take it down or do anything, let's do something with it, and yep, it's okay. And so it got repurposed, and now it's famous. It's known as Alien Rock, and it's a rock climbing sporting venue. So you can go in there. People love it going there because they do all the competition. And that's why Britain is doing really well in the Olympics. When they introduced it to the Olympics, the British teams, a lot of them were Scots, and they were practicing. There's 2 or 3 of them throughout Edinburgh that have been churches that have been converted into climbing areas. Now the storm's coming in a wee bit, so we'll try and keep it a wee bit shorter this week. But I want to show up a couple of buildings I want to show you. This lovely old building here. I don't know if Mike can focus in on the actual stone. This is all still sandstone. This is one of the lights for the harbour to guide the ships in. And if you look at the stone itself, it's all just eaten away by the weather.
Like cheese.
Absolutely like cheese. It's like Swiss cheese. It's full of holes. And so this is what most of the buildings in Edinburgh are built out of sandstone. Look at what can happen to our buildings if you're down here. I've always said that when I moved back to Edinburgh, I thought it's a big decision. Should I move to near the river? But I thought no, because your car rusts really quickly. You have to do more car maintenance down here. But this is one of the early harbour lights. So this was built in the early 1800s. Obviously not used anymore. But one of the other famous families that we always mention here in Edinburgh are the Stevensons. And it's all related to Robert Louis Stevenson, of course. But his father and his grandfather were great engineers. And most of the lighthouses that we have here around Britain were built by the Stevenson family. So they're known as the Stevenson Lighthouse. And we'll just walk out to the bay if it's okay. And we'll take you to the Stevenson Lighthouse. This was built in the later in the 1800s. There's about 50 years between the two lighthouses here. Now the Firth of Forth, great expanse of water. The word Firth comes from the Norse, shares the same root as fjord. So you're looking at the river here, or the estuary. So Firth is the Scottish word for estuary. And what you're looking at here is an estuary that's been carved out during the Ice Age. And the river's coming down here. And it is quite deep in the middle. There's a deep channel. At the moment, there are a couple of minke whales in here. A few weeks ago, there were humpbacks. And across the other side, you can't see at the moment, is the County of Fife, or the Kingdom of Fife, which is across the other side of the river. Now, a lot of people have been at whale spotting on the other side because you've got higher cliffs and you got a much better view down to the river than here. Now, a lot of people thought that they were going to be stranded with the whales coming up here, but actually they were coming up to feed because they still have large herring shoals here in the River Forth. And you do get people still fishing down here. Usually at the end of the pier, you'll see people fishing. And on the chain here, I guess it's one of these things that you see quite a lot. You get the love padlocks. And of course next week being February the 14th, I think there might be a few more being added to. So we've got Liz and Rob. Let's mention Liz and Rob, 27th of October 2021. And we've got somebody who's got Man Newton. And they've got a little message to each other, so I guess this is the thing that started in Pont Neuf in Paris, I believe, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Now the population here, you can probably get, I don't know if you can scan through from the village across to these modern complexes here, but this has been expanded, so it's all a big brownfield site. It's been redeveloped, reclaimed. Huge amount of development going on down here. I don't know if you can get a view of down here, Mike, as well, because there's a development on the other port down here. It's like all these little skyscrapers are going up. Everybody wants to live by the river nowadays as well. And so there's lots of new communities being built all over the north. And I think it's a really good idea. They're redeveloping the land that was used to be industrial, and they're bringing it back, and it just makes common sense. And also, with the trams coming down here, I think we'll see a big transformation. And last week we mentioned the oldest school that was still being used was a school here in Newhaven. It's called the Victoria School. Well, the Victoria School closed in January and literally transferred just across the street. So not only did they have the oldest active primary school in Edinburgh, they now have the newest active primary school in Edinburgh. So I think with the storm coming in a wee bit, I think we'll say our bye-byes here. I can't see a thing. I don't have my windshield wipers on. Can't see a thing. You know, as we're intrepid, whatever weather, we're down here in it's blowing a hoolie, as they say. It's blowing a hoolie. We're getting a bit sandblasted or weather beaten down here.